White House will allow the intelligence community to fully and promptly inform Congress if it detects foreign interference, especially if that interference appears to assist the president's reelection. That is a dangerous and unprecedented state of affairs, but nonetheless, it reflects the reality and why this hearing is so important. To the witnesses, as you describe in your respective written statements, a lot has changed since 2016. In many ways, we're better prepared today than we were 4 years ago. Each of your companies have taken significant steps and invested resources to detect coordinated inauthentic behavior and foreign interference. And while there cannot be a guarantee, it would be far more difficult for Russia or another foreign adversary to run the same 2016 playbook undetected. Both Facebook and Twitter now regularly update the public, the committee, and Congress on their findings as they identify and disrupt coordinated inauthentic behavior and foreign interference targeting the United States and other nations globally. U.S. government agencies with responsibility to unearth and fight foreign interference coordinate and meet regularly with technology companies and with us. The companies themselves have established mechanisms to share threat information and indicators both among themselves and smaller industry peers. Independent researchers have taken up the mantle in cooperation with platforms to apply their skills and knowledge to detecting and analyzing malicious networks in comprehensive public reports. These are positive developments, but as I look across the landscape, I can't say that I am confident that the 2020 election will be free of interference by malicious actors, foreign or domestic, who aspire to weaponize your platforms to divide Americans, pit us against one another, and weaken our democracy. We are learning, but our adversaries are also learning as well. And not only Russia, modest investments in the IRA and the hacking and dumping campaign aimed at the Clinton campaign paid off in spades, helping to elect the Kremlin's favored candidate and widening fissures between Americans. The lesson being, influence operations on social media are cheap and effective, and attribution to specific threat actors isn't always straightforward. In March, Facebook and Twitter took down a network comprised of Ghanaian and Nigerian individuals operating out of West Africa, who were acting essentially as cutouts for IRA-linked parties in Russia. This recruited network was tasked with targeting U.S. audiences with race-oriented content, echoes of 2016 to be sure, but also a sign of new tactics. And just this week, we saw the release of a Graphica report detailing a substantial network of accounts attributed to Russia, which the researchers dubbed secondary infection. And while neither network succeeded on the scale of the 2016 IRA efforts in generating viral content, they showed that Russia-linked actors remain determined and capable of sophisticated and malicious social media activity targeting U.S. politics and society. Secondary infection's operational security was reportedly very good, and their deployment of convincing forgeries should worry us all. Other countries have watched and learned from Russian active measures, and they may well seek to replicate them. As takedowns of coordinated inauthentic behavior have demonstrated, China, Iran, and other nations are using similar techniques aimed at international and domestic audiences, and they may choose to ramp up foreign influence operations in the future. And the question is, will your companies be able to keep up? Technology has evolved, including the rapid advent of deepfake technology, which was the subject of a hearing by the committee last year. Deepfakes and manipulated media could be weaponized by malicious actors to upend an election by laundering false images, audio, or videos into the information stream through social media and traditional media outlets. While each of your platforms has begun to adopt policies around deepfakes and manipulated media, it remains to be seen whether they are sufficient to detect and remove sinister manipulated media at speed. For once a visceral first impression has been made, even if proven false later, it is nearly impossible to repair the damage. I'm also concerned because the nature of your platforms, all of them, is to embrace and monetize virtuality and virality. The more sensational, the more divisive, the more shocking or emotionally charged, the faster it circulates. A tweet or Instagram photo or a YouTube video can be viewed by millions of Americans in the span of hours. A policy that only identifies and acts upon misinformation, whether from a foreign or domestic source, after millions of people have seen it, is only partial response at best. I recognize that at scale, the challenge of moderation is daunting. As we get closer to November, the stakes will only grow. And make no mistake, foreign actors and presidents alike are testing the limits of manipulated media right now. And finally, I am concerned because of an issue that I raised back in 2017 and repeatedly since. I'm concerned about whether social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and others, wittingly or otherwise, optimize for extreme content. These technologies are designed to engage users and keep them coming back, which is pushing us further apart and isolating Americans into information silos. Ultimately, the best and only corrective measure to address the pernicious problem of misinformation and foreign interference is ensuring that credible, verified, factual information rises above the polluting disinformation and falsehoods, whether about the location of polling places or about the medical consensus surrounding COVID-19. It remains paramount that all sectors of our society, including technology companies with us today, stand vigilant and postured to detect and disrupt foreign malign attempts to influence our political and societal discourse. Americans must decide American elections. With that, I want to thank again and welcome our witnesses who are joining us today. We'll proceed with 5-minute opening statements going in alphabetical order. First, Nathaniel Gleischer, Head of Security Policy at Facebook. Then Nick Pickles, Director of Global Public Policy Strategy and Development at Twitter. And finally, Rick Salgado, Director of Law Enforcement and Information Security at Google. Mr. Gleischer, we'll begin with you, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Schiff, Ranking Member Nunes, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. And I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you virtually. My name is Nathaniel Gleischer, and I'm the Head of Security Policy at Facebook. My work is focused on addressing the adversarial threats we face every day to the security and integrity of our products and services. I have a background in computer science and law, and before joining Facebook, I prosecuted cybercrime at the Department of Justice and served as Director for Cybersecurity Policy at the National Security Council. These are incredibly challenging times, and that's why it's more important than ever that people can have authentic conversations on our platforms about the issues that matter to them, whether that's COVID-19, racial and social injustice, family and economic concerns, or the upcoming elections. But we also know that malicious actors are working to interfere with these conversations, to exploit our societal divisions, to promote fraud, influence our elections, and delegitimize authentic social protest. My team was built to find and stop these bad actors, and we're working tirelessly to do so. Facebook has made significant investments to help protect the integrity of elections. We now have more than 35,000 people working on safety and security across the company, with nearly 40 teams focused specifically on elections and election integrity. We're also partnering with federal and state governments, other tech companies, researchers, and civil society groups to share information and stop malicious actors. Over the past 3 years, we've worked to protect more than 200 elections around the world. We've learned lessons from each of these, and we're applying these lessons to protect the 2020 election in November. We've taken a variety of steps to support the integrity and security of the electoral process, including launching Facebook Protect, a program that helps secure the accounts of elected officials, candidates, and their staff, increasing political and issue ad transparency, investigating and stopping coordinated inauthentic behavior. We've removed more than 50 deceptive networks in 2019 alone, and labeling posts by state-controlled media outlets so that people understand where their news is coming from. Yesterday, we began blocking ads in the United States from these state-controlled outlets to provide an extra layer of protection against foreign influence in the public debate ahead of the 2020 election in November. In addition, we know that misinformation and influence operations are at their most virulent in information vacuums. So we combine our enforcement efforts with ensuring that people can access authentic, accurate information about major civic moments like this global pandemic or voting. This is why we're creating a new voter information center to fight misinformation, to encourage people to vote, and to make sure voters have accurate and up-to-date information from their local, state, and federal election authorities. Because authenticity is the cornerstone of our community, we've also invested significantly in combating inauthentic behavior, both individual fake accounts and coordinated networks. For example, we disabled approximately 1.7 billion fake accounts between January and March of this year. Over 99% of those we identified proactively before we received any report, and for the vast majority, these were identified and removed within a very short period after they were created. We've also created tools to particularly identify fake accounts targeting civic issues like elections. In addition, so far this year, we've taken down 18 coordinated networks seeking to manipulate public debate, including 3 networks originating from Russia, 2 from Iran, and 2 based here in the United States. We've shared information on these networks with third-party researchers to enable their own independent assessments, and we release monthly reports to highlight the actions we're taking in one place. We've also been proactively hunting for bad actors trying to interfere with the important discussions about injustice and inequality happening around our nation. As part of this effort, we've removed isolated accounts seeking to impersonate activists, and 2 networks of accounts tied to organized hate groups that we'd previously banned from our platforms. Finally, we're also working to stop misinformation and harmful content related to the COVID-19 pandemic spreading on our platform. On Facebook and Instagram, we remove COVID-19 related misinformation that could contribute to imminent physical harm, such as posts and ads about fake cures. And we continue to work with our network of independent fact-checking partners to debunk other false claims and connect people with information from authoritative sources. We're proud of the progress we've made to protect authentic discourse on our platforms, but there's always more work to do. We're up against determined adversaries and will never be perfect, but we are fully committed to the vital work to stop bad actors and give people a voice. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Glacier. Mr. Pickles, you're up.
Chairman Schiff, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The purpose of Twitter is to serve the public conversation, and that conversation is never more important than during global elections and civic events, the cornerstone of democracies across the globe. Our service gives people the ability to share what is happening and provides people insights into a diversity of perspectives on critical issues, all in real time. We are humbled by the way that our platform is used by those seeking to speak out against injustice, to hold those in power accountable, and to build movements for change. The threat of interference in elections from foreign and domestic actors is real and evolving. Since 2016, we've made a number of significant investments to address these challenges and prepare against bad actors, taking lessons from the 2018 midterms and elections around the world. I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss our approach today, and I'll begin by focusing on the policies, products, changes, and partnerships Twitter now has in place. The Twitter rules directly address a number of potential threats to the integrity of elections. Under our civic integrity policy, individuals may not use Twitter for the purpose of manipulating or interfering in elections or other civic processes. This includes posting or sharing content that may suppress participation or mislead people about when, where, or how to participate in a civic process. We recently expanded this policy to cover civic events, for example, the census, in addition to elections. We prohibit the use of Twitter services in a manner that intends to artificially amplify or suppress the conversation. Our rules prohibit fake accounts and those impersonating others. We do not permit the distribution of hacked materials that contain private information, trade secrets, or could put people in harm's way. In addition to these new rules, Twitter's advertising policies also play an important part in protecting the public conversation. Firstly, Twitter does not allow political advertising. Online political advertising represents entirely new challenges to civic discourse that today's democratic infrastructure may not be prepared to handle, particularly the machine learning-based optimization of messaging and micro-targeting. Secondly, Twitter does not allow news media entities controlled by state authorities to advertise. This decision was initially taken with regard to Russia Today and Sputnik, based on the Russian activities during the 2016 election. Last year, we expanded this policy to cover all state-controlled media entities globally, in addition to individuals who are affiliated with those organizations. While our policies are vital to protect the conversation, We also want to be proactive in helping people on Twitter find credible information by providing them with additional context. This approach is informed by direct feedback from the people who use Twitter. In 2019, we opened up a public comment period and heard two clear points. Firstly, Twitter shouldn't determine the truthfulness of tweets. And secondly, Twitter should provide context to help people make up their own minds in cases where the substance of a tweet is disputed. We prioritize interventions regarding misinformation based on the highest potential for harm and are currently focused on three main areas of content: synthetic and manipulated media, elections and civic integrity, and COVID-19. Where content does not break our rules and warrant removal, in these three areas we may label tweets to help people come to their own views by providing additional context. These labels may link to a curated set of tweets posted by people on Twitter that include factual statements, counterpoint opinions and perspectives, and ongoing public conversation around the issue. To date, we've applied these labels to thousands of tweets around the world across these three policy areas. Finally, I'd like to outline how Twitter is empowering public understanding of the attempts to manipulate the public conversation. In 2018, we launched a public archive of the material that we have removed as part of our work to tackle platform manipulation. This one-of-a-kind resource, used by researchers, journalists, and experts around the world, now spans operations across 15 countries, including more than 9 terabytes of media and 200 million tweets. The use of this archive by a range of stakeholders highlights the importance of information sharing and partnership. Collaboration is critical to Twitter's efforts in preventing hostile actors from interfering in the public conversation. In certain circumstances, only government agencies have access to information critical to our efforts, and we're grateful for the continued partnership with federal, state, and local agencies, in particular the FBI Foreign Interference Task Force and the US Department of Homeland Security's Election Security Task Force. We also work in close collaboration with the National Association of Secretaries of State and the National Association of State Election Directors. We also partner with Civic Alliance, Vote Early Day, and National Voter Registration Day to amplify credible election-related content. We want people to have confidence in the integrity of the information found on Twitter, especially with respect to information relevant to elections and civic processes. We know that the threats and challenges are evolving, and we continue to invest in our efforts to address these threats posed by hostile actors and foster an environment conducive to healthy, meaningful conversations. We look forward to working with the committee on this vital issue.
Thank you, Mr. Pickles. Mr. Salgado, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Schiff and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today to provide an update on Google's efforts to protect election integrity and prevent platform abuse. My name is Richard Salgado. I am the Director of Law Enforcement and Information Security at Google. Google created its search engine in 1998 with a mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. As we cope with a global pandemic and are once again reminded of the injustices that continue to exist in our society, our role in helping people access high-quality information is more important than ever. Today, I'll be focusing on three main areas. First, our efforts to combat election-related interference. Second, how we are empowering people with authoritative information. And third, how we are improving transparency and accountability in advertising. I'll start by highlighting our continued investigative and preventive work to combat election-related interference. As we previously reported to the committee, our investigation into the 2016 elections found relatively little violative foreign government activity on our platform. Entering the 2018 midterms, we continued to improve our ability to detect and prevent election-related threats and engage in information sharing with others in the private sector and the government. While we saw limited misconduct linked to state-sponsored activity in the 2018 midterms, we continue to keep the public informed. We recently launched a quarterly bulletin to provide additional information about our findings concerning coordinated influence operations. This joins other public reporting across products as we shed light on what it is that we're seeing. Looking ahead to the November elections, we know that COVID-19 pandemic, widespread protests, and other significant events can provide fodder for nation-state sponsored disinformation campaigns. We remain steadfast in our commitment to protect our users. Second, we have continued to improve the integrity of our products. Our approach is built on a framework of 3 strategies: making quality count in our ranking systems, giving users more context, and counteracting malicious actors. In search, ranking algorithms are an important tool in our fight against disinformation. Ranking elevates information that our algorithms determine is the most authoritative above information that may be less reliable. Similarly, our work on YouTube focuses on identifying and removing content that violates our policies and elevating authoritative content when users search for breaking news. At the same time, we find and limit the spread of borderline content that comes close but just stops short of violating our policies. The work to protect Google products and our users is no small job, but it's important. We invest heavily in automated tools to tackle a broad set of malicious behaviors and in people who review content and help improve these tools. We applied many of these strategies in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and developed new ways to connect users to authoritative government information. Similarly, we work to remove misinformation that poses harm to people and undermines efforts to reduce infection rates. On YouTube, we have clear policies prohibiting content that promotes medically unsubstantiated treatments or disputes the existence of COVID-19. We also reduce recommendations of borderline content. Third, Google has made election advertising far more transparent. We now require advertisers purchasing US election ads to verify who they are and disclose who paid for the ad in the ad itself. We launched a transparency report with a searchable ad library as well. Micro-targeting of election ads was never allowed on Google systems, but targeting of election ads in the US is now further limited to general geographic location, age, gender, and context where the ad would appear. This aligns with long-established practices in media such as TV, radio, and print. Finally, this April, we announced that we will extend identity verification to all advertisers on our platform, with a rollout beginning this summer. We certainly can't do this important work alone. Preventing platform abuse, combating disinformation, and protecting elections requires concerted effort and collaboration across the industry and with governments. We will continue to do our part, seek to improve and correct our mistakes and learn from them along the way in order to better protect the collective digital ecosystem. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss these issues.
Well, thank you to all of our witnesses for your statements. We'll now begin the question period, and I'll recognize myself to begin the questioning. And Mr. Salgado, if I could begin with a question for you, and let me just frame it this way. You know, I think the conventional wisdom among observers of the tech sector, people in academia, and others, is that Google is probably the least transparent of the major technology companies. You know, contrasting, for example, Twitter's establishment of a database to make available to researchers and the public what it finds in terms of inauthentic activity on its platform. There is no such equivalence in terms of disclosures by Google. Are you contemplating a change in terms of making data available to the public and researchers that would facilitate analyses of foreign or even domestic efforts at inauthentic content? And how do you respond to the criticism that Google has essentially adopted a strategy of keeping its head down and avoiding attention to its platform while others draw heat?
Well, I certainly hope that's not the perception. If it is, it's a misperception, Mr. Chairman. We've been very transparent, particularly on YouTube. We've got a transparency report that actually details quite a bit about the actions that are taken on videos, lots of statistics there that may be useful for public policymakers and the public and researchers as well, including on comments, not just on the videos. We have launched a bulletin that will be published quarterly that goes into influence operations that we've seen. We released a set just a few weeks ago, I believe it is. So the transparency into that is important to us. The information sharing is important to us. And we've certainly engaged in the debate with public policymakers and the public on these important issues. It is true we don't see the volume that the others in the industry see, but we are talking about what it is we see and fighting it and taking it seriously.
Would you be supportive of establishing the kind of database that Twitter has announced it's establishing to share more data along those lines?
I'd have to understand a little better about what it is. We've done that with regard to advertisements. If you look at the ads transparency report, you'll actually see the details of ads and the content of it, how much was paid, the penetration of those ads, who's behind them. So where we see our products deeply involved, we've done just that. If the focus is on YouTube, we can take it back and see if there's something useful in that arena.
Let me ask, if I could, Facebook and Twitter. Can you tell us what you're seeing on a couple issues that are of great concern to us? The first is, and I applaud Twitter for putting those labels on the presidential tweets regarding absentee voting, but I'm concerned that foreign powers may be amplifying that misinformation about whether voting by absentee is a safe or secure way to vote. Are you seeing any foreign manipulation or amplification of that false information? And likewise, are you seeing yet efforts by foreign powers to exploit divisions as they did in 2016 around Black Lives Matter, or now regarding the pandemic?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of both of those issues, I can begin by reassuring the committee that we haven't found evidence of concerted platform manipulation by foreign actors in either of those areas. Where you're absolutely right to draw the connection is we have seen a change in tactics. And I think this in part is a result of the success that we've had in clamping down on the inauthentic platform manipulation operations. So activity, particularly around COVID and the geopolitics, but also the issues in the United States around particularly policing, have transferred into state-controlled media, have transferred into the geopolitical space. And so we are seeing the public use of Twitter. Accounts that use Twitter are visible to anybody with or without an account. And those media entities and those government accounts are engaging in the geopolitical conversation. And so we have seen, for example, some crossover from the Chinese actors comparing the police response in the United States to recent protests with their policing response in Hong Kong. And so that shift from platform manipulation to overt state assets is something that we've observed. And I think it reminds us that we have to be vigilant that the challenges we faced in 2016 aren't constant, and that this remains an evolving security challenge that we have to keep one step ahead of and keep looking at how bad actors change their behavior.
Ms. Gleischer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree particularly with something Mr. Pickles just said. We definitely see the tactics in this space evolving, and we see the threat actors trying new efforts to get around the controls that are put in place. We haven't seen coordinated inauthentic behavior on the part of foreign governments, particularly targeting voting systems or how to vote in the United States. It's definitely something we're monitoring. One of the most important tools in this context is ensuring that people do have accurate information about how to vote and how to vote safely. Part of the reason we launched our Voting Information Center and announced it yesterday, part of the reason why we announced it yesterday actually feeds directly into our security strategy. Providing that accurate information is one of the best ways to mitigate those types of threats. You also asked Congressman about coordinated inauthentic behavior engaging with the protests. What I would say is we've seen some cases of fraudsters and spammers trying to make money off of public debate around the protests, even going so far as trying to sell non-existent t-shirts to attendees or to people who might be attending. We've seen people trying to run financially motivated scams. We have not seen foreign actors engage in coordinated inauthentic behavior around the protests yet, and we have teams that are proactively hunting for that so that if we do find it, we could announce it publicly, people would be aware of it, and we'd share that information here with the committee and with our partners in industry and in government.
Thank you. Jim Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Mr. Glaser, I want to ask you a question that I kind of feel has been insufficiently addressed here. I'm glad, and I've read the testimony. I'm glad everybody's doing so much work to try to identify foreign presence and all of that sort of thing. But I'm pretty convinced that when this republic dies, it doesn't happen because the Russians broke into Ohio voting machines or they managed to buy ads on Facebook or Twitter. It happens because our politics become so toxic, so polarized that we don't recognize each other anymore as Americans. And there is a foreign nexus here because all it takes if every single American household is full of toxic, explosive gas, as I think it is today, all it takes is a match from Russia or from Iran or from North Korea or from China to set off a conflagration. So, Mr. Gleiser, I read the Wall Street Journal article about the work that has happened inside Facebook, and I was very troubled by the apparent unwillingness of Facebook to, in a very public and specific way, come to terms with the notion that its algorithm, which is really what worries me in terms of the security of this country, that its algorithm promotes polarization, division, and anger. You keep using the word community and authentic. I hear it over and over again. Those are value neutral words. There's nothing good or bad about authenticity or good or bad about community. I'm old enough, the 1984 Olympics were held in Sarajevo, right? In 1984, Sarajevo was Muslims and Bosnians and Croats coming all together, and it was wonderful. And then Slobodan Milosevic in the 1990s injected some authenticity, some anti-Muslim bias on the part of the Serbs, created new communities, murderous Serbian nationalists, and created new communities. Those are value neutral words. So, Mr. Gleiser, the real threat to me feels like Facebook's underlying business model and algorithm, which promotes engagement, but engagement means it's like me driving a highway and watching a car crash. I can't not look at it. So that is what scares me most. And I've got 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So, Mr. Gleiser, I really want to understand what Facebook is specifically doing. And to some extent, this pertains a little bit, I think, to Twitter and YouTube, et cetera. But what is Facebook doing to not be the Slobodan Milosevic of the destruction of the American Republic?
Congressman, understanding how to ensure not just authentic, but positive and collaborative public debate is absolutely critical. I completely agree. What we've found is that people who are on our platforms, users, they don't want to see clickbait. They don't want to see the type of divisive content that you're describing. If we were to show only that, users actually wouldn't want to engage and they wouldn't come back. That's why we downrank content that is qualifies as clickbait. That's why we take steps, for example, not to recommend groups that are repeatedly sharing information that crosses certain lines. That's why we have refocused the public debate around our platform, and when we think about the algorithm in particular, to content from friends and family, content that it centers around discussions and public conversations, not the type of divisive narratives that you're describing.
Mr. Glaser, I'm in politics, right? And in the political realm, and I'd like to see the facts behind the studies underlying the notion that people don't like divisiveness and that they don't like clickbait. I mean, clickbait is a thing because people like clickbait. But I'm in politics, right? And I know that there's a difference that when I walk into a room full of people who think like I do and present nuances and complications and shades of gray, that's a pretty boring meeting, and I'm a pretty boring guy. But when I walk into a room and I present things as good versus evil, as the system is rigged against you, that is a energized room. And so what you're telling me in the political realm is just not resonating with me. And again, I get it. You guys want excitement. That's what draws me to Facebook. But I want to understand specifically And I understand this probably means less profit, but specifically, what is Facebook going to do to be more constructive? Your word.
Congressman, the interesting distinction or the important distinction we've seen, people will certainly click on clickbait. I mean, hence the name and the intent. But in the long term, if they're looking for a community, if they're looking for a place they want to engage, they don't want that community to be rife with that. And that's why we've taken steps to adjust the way we're ranking content to ensure that we're not prioritizing and promoting that. And it directly aligns with having a community, having a platform that will persist and that users will want to use.
Well, Mr. Glacier, I'm out of time, but I'm going to continue this discussion because you're just not resonating with me. You know, look at the presidential candidates, and if the chairman will give me just 10 more seconds, look at the presidential candidates. Look at the current president. Americans are drawn to people who are explosive and controversial and paint the world in terms of good and evil and black and white. My friend John Delaney, you know, who knows, you know, who remembers John Delaney? Because he was constructive and thoughtful and moderate in his approach. So I end this conversation, Mr. Gleicher, more concerned than when I started, because you're telling me that people don't seek that kind of thing in politics. And that's just contrary to everything I observe in my own political life and in the political life of the country. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your forbearance, and I yield back.
Thank you. Terry Sewell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank our speakers and panelists today. We know from past disclosures that foreign actors have taken advantage of our platforms to spread misinformation, which only undermines our democratic discourse. Through your platforms, these actors can attempt to covertly influence or skew our national conversation towards chaos and confusion, and in fact, they've done so. It is therefore incumbent upon each of your companies to quickly expose foreign influence operations and to disable those before this misinformation spreads. You must take steps ahead of their sophisticated tactics, which are ever evolving as they gain a better understanding of what flames they can stow in order to sow more discord. We all saw that Twitter responded to the fact check misleading information about mail-in voting tweeted by President Trump last month. Mr. Pickle, I represent America's voting rights district, the heart of which is my hometown of Selma, Alabama, and I'm in my Selma office today. We know that marchers bled, fought, and died for the rights of all Americans, especially African Americans, to vote in this country. We have secured responsibility. We have a sacred responsibility, I believe, to protect the rights and the votes of all Americans, which includes actions like the one taken by Twitter to counter misinformation about voting, regardless of how powerful the person sharing the misinformation is. Propaganda designed to suppress the Black vote has been a part of our democracy since we were able to vote. While it is not new, social media creates the potential for such voter suppression tactics and misinformation to spread even further. I therefore urge all of your companies to vigorously uphold your commitments to preempting misinformation, whether from a foreign or domestic source that could interfere with the voting process. My community has been the target of misleading information about voting for generations, always bearing the brunt when institutions like yours don't take responsibility to stop the spread of misinformation. Russian tactics to interfere in our elections, which we saw all too well in 2016, largely targeted Black Americans and other communities of color. Between the disparate impact of COVID-19 has had on the Black community and the growing racial tensions our country has over the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, the political landscape is fertile ground for foreign adversaries as well as domestic aggression to undermine genuine trust and confusion in this country. I'd like to submit, Mr. Chairman, for the record, two articles, one entitled Facebook, Twitter Suspend Russian-Linked Operations Targeting African Americans on Social Media from the Washington Post, and the other, Russian Election Meddling is Back via Ghana and Nigeria and in your feeds from CNN. Can I submit these for the record, sir?
Without objection.
I'd also like to enter into the record a report from Graphica called IRA in Ghana, Double Deceit. These articles tell us about a sophisticated cross-platform influence operation that targeted Black communities in the United States. The operation, which was exposed by CNN, Twitter, Facebook, Graphica, and Clemson University professors, was run from Ghana. And I'd like to ask a question of you, the representative from Twitter. Could you have found this efforts quicker? And if so, what could you have done to stop it even quicker?
Well, thank you for raising these critical issues. And we, as you say, have taken on a number of campaigns in the 2016 midterms or 2018 midterms. We took action on around 6,000 tweets of voter suppression that were domestic in origin primarily. You're absolutely right to highlight the challenge here of moving as fast as possible. That's about investment. It's also about partnerships. And so as you highlighted there, industry working together, working with expert researchers and the work at Graphica, Camille Francois, Ben Nimmo doing incredible work that we saw this week in their report on secondary infection. So I think the answer is we need stronger partnerships. We need more information sharing, both with government and across industry. And since 2016, in both of those areas, we've made significant progress and are in a much stronger position today.
Mr. Glacier, what would your platform would have done to spot these kinds of operations sooner, and what lessons were learned, and how are we to create barriers from more sophisticated actors?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. What we saw, and one of the things I'm really proud of here, is that this was a network that our teams found, exposed, worked with our colleagues in industry and in journalism and elsewhere to make sure it was down and people were aware of it. One of the two things that we learned: first, this technique is actually not new. It's a callback to techniques that Russian actors have used for decades. We're seeing more and more they are returning to techniques from the 60s, 70s, and 80s in attempts to evade or get around the detection we've put in place. And we as a community have to be incredibly vigilant to that. One key thing we learned here was that the platforms are able to do a particular kind of investigation on our platforms, on the networks, and connectivity on the platforms. The CNN reporting in this context, where they were able to go on the ground and interview individuals, was an incredibly powerful complement to that work. And I think it reinforces how you need to have close ties between these communities to surface this information quickly, expose it, and get it down before it can have significant impact.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jackie Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you all for joining us this, well, it's morning here, but afternoon there. Mr. Glacier, you may or may not know that Facebook is headquartered in my congressional district. I've had many conversations with Sheryl Sandberg, and I'm still puzzled by the fact that Facebook does not consider itself a media platform. Are you still espousing that kind of position?
Congresswoman, we're first and foremost a technology company.
Well, you may be a technology company, but your technology company is being used as a media platform. Do you not recognize that?
Congresswoman, we're a place for ideas across the spectrum. We know that there are people who use our platforms to engage, and in fact, that is the goal of the platforms, to encourage and enable people to discuss the key issues of the day and to talk to family and friends.
How long, or maybe I should ask this, when there was a video of Speaker Pelosi that had been tampered with, slowed down to make her look like she was drunk, YouTube took it down almost immediately. What did Facebook do, and what went into your thinking to keep it up?
Congresswoman, for a piece of content like that, we work with a network of third-party fact checkers, more than 60 third-party fact checkers around the world. If one of them determines that a piece of content like that is false, then we will downrank it and we will put an interstitial on it so that anyone who would look at it would first see a label over it saying that there's additional information and that it's false. That's what we did in this context. When we downrank something like that, we see the shares of that video radically drop.
But you won't take it down when you know it's false.
Congresswoman, you're highlighting a really difficult balance, and we've talked about this amongst ourselves quite a bit. And what I would say is, if we simply take a piece of content like this down, it doesn't go away. It will exist elsewhere on the internet. people who are looking for it will still find it.
Well,
If
I
we leave the
understand
content,
that, but you know, there will always be bad actors in the world. That doesn't mean that you don't do your level best to show the greatest deal of credibility. I mean, if YouTube took it down, I don't understand how you couldn't have taken it down, but I'll leave that where it lays. You had said in your opening statements that you have taken down, I believe that's what you said, taken down some networks from Iran, from Russia, and you might have mentioned another country. Could you drill down for us and tell us specifically what they were selling? What was it that you found offensive that you actually took that down, where you didn't take the video of Nancy Pelosi down?
Congresswoman, the focus of my team's work is on what we call inauthentic behavior. That is not the content that's being shared, but behavior or techniques that these actors use to hide their identity, make their content appear more popular than it is, or otherwise mislead users. Last year, we took down 50 networks, or more than 50 networks around the world for engaging in this from many different countries. This year so far, we've taken down 18.
Can you drill down as to what they were doing?
Absolutely. So a network like this will be using fake accounts and an organized group of fake accounts to mislead users about who's behind the network. For example, we saw a network based right here in the United States that was representing itself as a US news source, when in fact it was using networks of accounts run by actors from overseas to write its content and purportedly pretend to be Americans. We've taken down networks linked to entities coming out of Russia that present themselves as local when in fact they are centrally controlled by another organization. So for example, we did a takedown of a network linked to Sputnik News, a state media organization out of Russia, that ran seemingly independent news organizations across Europe, representing themselves as independent and claiming to be independent, when in fact they were all centrally controlled and driving a message directly back from the organization that was running. That's the type of behavior that we enforce against when we see these actors engage in deceptive techniques. We announce it publicly, we share information with third parties, and we make sure that it's very clear in public. We have a monthly report where we detail this in great detail. And I could ensure that our teams share with you our recent reports so you can have more detail if that's helpful.
I'm sure that would be. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mike Quigley.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for participating. You all reference sharing and collaboration and its value. Tell us what's impairing that, if anything. Is there anything legally that makes this more difficult? Other actors that make it more difficult? Or just internal measures that limit your capacity to share information and to collaborate with other platforms, third parties, federal, state, and local officials? Anyone?
I'm happy to offer some thoughts and then let colleagues chip in. Thank you, Congressman, for raising this important issue. The space that we work in is the tension between privacy and security often. So on the one hand, laws may compel us to not store data for longer than we need it. On the other hand, we may not know that information is relevant at the time that we remove the accounts. Information operations and actors who are trying to hide their behavior often use a variety of techniques, and while we focus on the social media end of the spectrum where you see the content, we often don't focus on the technical infrastructure that actors may use. So we don't have all the information straight away. So there's a tension there between removing content and then removing the data versus holding on to data in case we know something later that would actually enable us to say these accounts that we removed, at the time we didn't realize they were state linked, but now we think they are state linked. So that tension is definitely one. And secondly, as I referenced in my opening statement, the more government can declassify information. I think one of the striking things from Graphica's report, Secondary Infection, was there were 300 platforms used. And while the larger platforms have invested significantly, there's also a responsibility on us to mentor and support our peers in industry based on our skills and expertise. And I think the government being able to share more information publicly would enable more of those small companies who are often not part of these discussions firsthand to learn and take steps to protect themselves. So happy to let others weigh in, but they would be two areas I'd highlight.
Congressman, I'd just add, I think in the last couple of years, particularly among industry and with our partners in government, our ability to share information has gotten much, much better. We've had a number of cases where we've gotten tips from, for example, the FBI that has helped us take rapid action. Two things that are worth considering. I think there have been some questions about transparency and sharing data about these takedowns publicly. That type of sharing information publicly, we think is really important because it helps people understand what's happening. The legal framework around what you can share and what you should share is not as clear as it could be right now. And I think that raises questions for all the platforms. How do we ensure that the public is aware of what's happening and researchers are aware of what's happening in a way that they can dig in without impacting the privacy of innocent users who could get swept up in it? That's an area where I think it could be particularly valuable. But at the same time, as Mr. Pickles noted, the information that we're sharing here often is very sensitive and it needs to be handled very carefully. So I don't think we're ever going to remove the tension here. But I do think that some clarity would help us be able to share faster, share more with the public, and share more with our partners.
Richard?
Thank you. I think the biggest struggle we've had on the information front was referred to by Mr. Pickles already, which is the quite understandable but formidable difficulty that the intelligence community has in sharing classified information with the companies. And I suspect, as Mr. Pickles suggested, there's an issue of overclassification of this, or perhaps a difficulty, bureaucratic or otherwise, in the agencies finding ways to declassify the less sensitive parts of information, threats, leads that would be useful for the platforms. Other than that, as Mr. Glacier pointed out, the information sharing among the companies and with governments has improved greatly since 2016, is almost to the point of being unrecognizable compared to where we were back then. And we're not seeing a lot of legal impediments that we need to see addressed other than the issue with the classification.
Thank you all. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Eric Swalwell.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Salgado, do YouTube's comments fall under the same policy as Google Display Ads, your comments policy on YouTube?
You know, I'm afraid I don't know the policies deep enough to be able to give you some useful information on that. We have so many products with so many policies, and I have to confess I'm not.
Okay, if you could follow up with a letter on that. Have you ever taken down One America News Network videos for misinformation?
That's an issue I'm not sure I can give you a direct answer on. It's a specific question about a specific potential, anyway, publisher.
How about Fox News?
Again, I don't know if there is an example of that. I'd have to check. There's an awful lot of removals that you can see on our transparency report, but that detail I don't know right now.
You know, the New York Times, Mr. Salgado, recently reported that conspiracy news site Epoch has spent, Epoch has spent $1 million on ads with YouTube. Does that sound accurate?
I don't know the figure. I understand they may be an advertiser, yeah.
And according to Social Blade, a website that estimates the revenues that content creators get paid by YouTube to make their content, RT, OANN, One News Network, and Epoch are earning collectively up to $2 million in revenue this year. Does that seem accurate to you?
You know, I need to check with the team to be able to come up with real figures that I could testify to and help you.
Well, could you walk me through how a creator like One America News Network, which has been, I think, called out by most credible news agencies as propagating Russian materials, how could they get paid by Google when it creates a video that people watch? Can you just explain how they would actually make money in addition to running ads?
Well, there are of course two different products that you're talking about here. One is an offering where you can advertise, you can pay to have your advertise appear the blog posts or websites of other publishers. And then there's the ability to actually monetize the content you upload, for example, to YouTube. There are policies, as you referred to earlier on both of those around who can advertise and what can be advertised. And then there are also policies on what sort of content are we willing to actually run advertisements on. So there are
Will Google be making, will Google have a policy for vaccine misinformation on YouTube?
There will be policies that address on ads in particular, ads that can cause public health damage, deceptive ads. There's a range of policies. They're actually all publicly available and can be looked at by anybody, including the advertisers.
And can I just do a little round robin here? And this is an unclassified briefing, but I do want to know, when have any of you, how recently have any of you met with the FBI about misinformation? Again, I don't want any details about the case, about the country. Just when was the last time you had a conversation about something you saw? I'll start with Mr. Salgado.
These are routine conversations. I won't say that they're necessarily weekly, but it starts to approach the conversational cadence that we have. I'm fine to be open about this. There's nothing classified about it. They tend to be largely with the local field office out here in California. With sometimes they're ad hoc, and we also have a regular cadence of meetings. But it's actually rather routine at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Pickles.
Just to echo that, our engagement with the FBI is incredibly regular, whether it be phone calls or emails. We have formal meetings as well on a monthly basis, but the dialogue is as needed. So actually, if the FBI has concerns about a specific tweet, specific issue, we'll have real-time dialogue. We're not going to wait for sort of meeting dates in the calendar.
And Mr. Gleicher, just before I go to you, I ask because this committee has worked to pass legislation that would essentially put a duty to report on social media companies if they see foreign interference on their platform, and that has not become law yet it's not been passed in the Senate. But could you just tell us about your interactions with the FBI when you see misinformation?
Certainly, Congressman. As Mr. Pickles and Mr. Salgado mentioned, we actually have a periodic monthly meeting with FBI and DHS and government partners that we all participate in. That is at a strategic level, so we can talk about the threats that we're seeing. We can all make sure that we're sort of aligned and working together as effectively as possible. In addition, whenever we see foreign interference or a CIV takedown, we'll share information about that with law enforcement. So for example, we announced our latest monthly report of all the takedowns we've done, and that was last week or the week before. When we did that, we would have shared information ahead of time with our law enforcement partners to make sure that they can follow up if there's something particularly that implicates foreign interference here in the United States.
Thank you. Next up, we have...
It's locked down. So, Ms. Gressler, the ranking member, Mr. Scalise, talked about this earlier. Why, in fact, did we lock down